It started with a single wire, buried beneath the sidewalk, a wire no one was supposed to touch. Yet, in one quiet suburban block, someone did. The lights on the street cameras flickered, emergency radios crackled into static, and within minutes, an entire network went dark. Residents stood in confusion, but one man knew exactly what had happened. He'd warned them before, told the HOA to leave the connections alone. But they didn't listen. The woman in charge, the one everyone called Karen, said she was just enforcing neighborhood regulations, trimming, tidying, maintaining order. But this wasn't just any wire. This one was part of the police communication system. And the moment she cut it, she didn't just strip a switch. She triggered a federal investigation. The neighborhood that once obsessed over mailbox heights and lawn colors suddenly found itself under the watchful eyes of federal agents. Every security camera, every router, every forgotten device in their smart homes began to tell a story, one of arrogance, defiance, and a mistake far bigger than anyone imagined. And in the middle of it all stood one man, the homeowner. The only person who knew the truth that the HOA had just stepped into something far beyond their control. Because what began as a petty neighborhood dispute was about to become a full-blown federal incident. But the real question was, when the system struck back, who would it come for first? For years, the neighborhood on Cedar Ridge Lane had been the kind of place people dreamed of settling into: quiet streets lined with trimmed hedges, pastel-painted homes, and neighbors who waved, but never stayed long enough to know your story. It was the sort of place where everything looked perfect on the surface. But underneath that perfection lay an unspoken pressure to conform. Every flower bed, every fence height, every color of every mailbox was dictated by a thick rule book, signed and stamped by the HOA. Most residents followed along without question. Most, but not all. The homeowner at the center of it all, Ryan Hawley, was different. He wasn't a troublemaker, not at first. He was a systems engineer who loved order, structure, and peace. After years of late-night coding and long commutes, he'd finally bought his dream home, a corner property with a large oak tree and a small workshop in the back. To him, it was more than a house. It was a sanctuary. He'd built a small network system inside, linking his workshop to a local emergency monitoring hub. It was harmless, even helpfully done it before as part of community safety programs in other cities. But this HOA didn't see it that way. To them, every wire, every antenna, every signal that wasn't pre-approved was a violation. Ryan had heard whispers about them before the board members who watched like hawks, the woman in charge who everyone called Karen, and the constant stream of warnings that arrived in neatly folded envelopes marked "Notice of Note." Still, he didn't worry much. He paid his dues, kept his lawn trimmed, and minded his business. For months, everything was fine until the day the HOA started sending letters about unauthorized equipment. At first, he ignored them, assuming it was some clerical mistake. But soon, he noticed the small things: a stranger photographing his property from the sidewalk, a complaint form slipped under his door, a board member hovering a little too long near his front yard. And then came the knock, sharp, deliberate, and early in the morning. Standing there was Karen, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp as glass, smiling in a way that didn't reach her face. She said she was just checking on a possible violation, but Ryan could tell from the way she scanned his yard that this was about Bufu Ka Berde, was about control. Still, he stayed calm. He explained everything, even offered to show her the documentation for his system. But she didn't care. The only thing that mattered to her was that it was in on the HOA's list of approved installations. From that moment, something in the air shifted. The friendly waves from neighbors started to fade. The smiles turned into polite nods, then to silence. Ryan's once peaceful home began to feel like a surveillance zone. Every noise, every flicker of his porch light seemed to draw attention. And beneath the surface, Karen was preparing something bigger, something that would turn a simple misunderstanding into a neighborhood-wide standoff. What Ryan didn't know was that his small home network, the one he'd built to help the community, was about to make him the center of an investigation that reached far beyond the HOA's control. At first, Ryan tried to brush it off. After all, how bad could an HOA really be? A few warning letters, maybe a fine, perhaps a stern reminder about compliance. But as the weeks went by, the tone of those letters changed. What started as polite notices became threats of legal action, each one more aggressive than the last. The envelopes no longer came in white. They arrived in bold red, stamped with the words, "Final Warning." They accused him of maintaining unauthorized electronic equipment, of tampering with shared infrastructure, and most shockingly of compromising neighborhood security systems. It didn't make sense. Ryan wasn't breaking any laws. He was enhancing safety. But logic didn't matter. Power did, and Karen had plenty of it. She ran the HOA meetings like a courtroom, her every word final, her every decision unquestioned. Neighbors who once smiled at Ryan now avoided eye contact. It was as if she'd turned the entire community against him. Rumors spread like wildfire, people whispering that Ryan was spying on neighbors, that he'd connected his system to the police feed, even that he was being watched by the feds. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. Then, one morning, Ryan woke to the sound of footsteps outside his house. 2 HOA board members were standing in his driveway with clipboards, taking photos of his garage and workshop. When he confronted them, they simply said, "We're gathering evidence." Evidence for what? They wouldn't say. That night, a notice was pinned to his front door. Cease operations immediately or face daily fines of $500. He laughed at first. Surely this was a bluff. But then the fines started. Every day, a new letter arrived, each one adding hundreds of dollars to his supposed debt. And then, with chilling confidence, she said, "The matter has been reported to authorities." Ryan tried to speak, to defend himself, but every word was drowned out by whispers of accusation. That night, as he sat alone in his workshop surrounded by blinking equipment, he realized he wasn't just fighting an HOA anymore. He was fighting a machine built on fear, reputation, and control. And the people running it were willing to destroy anyone who threatened that power. What he didn't know was that his proof, his logs, his evidence had already drawn attention from someone else. Someone outside the neighborhood. Someone who was about to turn this petty HOA dispute into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Over the next few days, Ryan noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked along his street. Black SUVs, unmarked but official looking. At first, he thought it was paranoia, but then, one afternoon, a man in a dark jacket approached his door and flashed a badge, Federal Infrastructure Division. He sighed calmly. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." Ryan's stomach sank. The agents weren't aggressive, but their questions were pointed. They wanted to know about the network he'd built, the connections it accessed, the security measures he used. Ryan explained everything: how it was designed to monitor local emergency frequencies, how it could reroute signals in case of outages, how it had actually helped during previous power failures. The agents exchanged looks, then thanked him for his cooperation. But before leaving, one of them said something that made Ryan's blood run cold. "If what you're saying is true, then someone's been tampering with more than just your system." That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He replayed the agent's words over and over. The next morning, news broke that the local police network outage had triggered a federal review of all communication lines in the district. Investigators were tracing the disruption back to one location, Cedar Ridge Lane. Suddenly, Karen's smug confidence began to crack. She called an emergency HOA meeting, claiming the community was being unfairly targeted because of Ryan's unauthorized activity. But the federal team wasn't. Listening to her excuses, they were tracing signatures, timestamps, and tampering data. And all the trails led to one access point, the HOA SO maintenance terminal, located behind Karen's office. When word got out, panic erupted. Board members started pointing fingers, trying to distance themselves from Karen. But she doubled down, insisting Ryan had hacked the HOA system to frame her. Meanwhile, Ryan's evidence logs began to circulate quietly through the federal review team. They saw his timestamps, his camera footage, even the footage of the night the shadows approached his junction box. It was irrefutable. The sabotage didn't come from Ryan, it came from within the HOA. Still, the ordeal wasn't over. Karen, desperate to protect herself, began a smear campaign. Flyers appeared in mailboxes calling Ryan a danger to the community. Fake online reviews popped up labeling him unstable. His employer even received anonymous complaints, accusing him of misusing government tech. It was character assassination. And for a while, it worked. Ryan felt trapped in his own home, watching as his reputation crumbled piece by piece. But he refused to stay silent. He compiled everything into a single digital report: emails, recordings, logs, and surveillance data, and sent it directly to the lead federal investigator. Days passed without a word. Then, one morning, as the sun broke over the quiet neighborhood, black SUVs returned, this time not for Ryan, but for the HOA office. Agents swarmed the building, collecting files and equipment. Karen stood outside, speechless, as officers sealed her laptop in an evidence bag. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the woman who once ruled them with an iron clipboard was led away for questioning. For the first time in months, Ryan felt the tension lift. But just as he thought it was over, one of the agents approached him again. "Mr. Hall," he said, "your network was the only reason we caught this early. The breach was spreading beyond your block." Ryan's eyes widened. Beyond his block. What did that mean? The agent simply nodded. "The system your HOA tampered with was connected to a backup line, federal emergency infrastructure. If they'd damaged it any further, he didn't finish. He didn't have to." The implication was clear. This wasn't just neighborhood drama. It was almost a national security failure. And it all started with a power-hungry HOA president who wanted to prove she was in charge. That night, as Ryan walked through the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge Lane, he noticed something strange. For the first time, the lights on every porch were dark, not because of sabotage, but because people were afraid. Afraid of what had been exposed. The illusion of control was shattered. The HOA's power was gone, replaced by silence and shame. And yet, somewhere deep down, Ryan knew it wasn't the end. Because people like Karen didn't just vanish, they resurfaced, rebranded, found new ways to climb. But this time, Ryan was ready. He'd seen what happened when power went unchecked. He'd watched a peaceful neighborhood turn into a battleground of paranoia and pride. And now, as he stared up at the dark sky, one question burned in his mind, the same one that would soon echo across every homeowners association in the country. What happens when the ones enforcing order become the ones breaking it? The day of the hearing arrived under a heavy gray sky, as if the clouds themselves were holding their breath. The HOA had gathered in the community center, once a cheerful place filled with bake sales and summer parties, now transformed into a battleground of whispers and tension. The long table at the front was stacked with binders, folders, and microphones, all arranged neatly before Karen, who sat like a queen, presiding over her domain. Her smile was thin, her eyes sharp, her clipboard resting in front of her like a weapon. Ryan walked in calmly, holding a single black case under his arm. The room went silent. Every seat was filled with neighbors, board members, even a few unfamiliar faces from the city offices. He could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him, judging, speculating, waiting for him to crumble. Karen spoke first, her voice smooth and practiced. She accused him of non-compliance, of endangering the community, of knowingly connecting unauthorized systems to municipal infrastructure. Her words were sharp, rehearsed, and every sentence seemed to strike like a knife. She produced photos, false reports, and even a statement from a supposed expert claiming Ryan's equipment posed a risk to public safety. Each piece of evidence was more absurd than the last, yet the board nodded along, pretending to understand, pretending this was justice. Ryan let her talk. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. He'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, and now, as Karen's words echoed through the hall, he finally saw it for what it was, a performance. When she was done, she leaned back, confident, certain she'd won. "Mr. Haley," she said, her tone dripping with authority, "do you have anything to say in your defense before we vote?" Ryan set his case on the table and opened it. Inside were neatly labeled drives, folders, and printed documents. "I do," he said quietly. And as he connected a small device to the projector, the lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life, showing a time-stamped video feed. The footage showed two figures crouched by his junction box the same night the police network failed. The resolution was clear. the time code undeniable. This, Ryan said steadily, is the night you accused me of sabotage. These aren't technicians. They're members of this very board. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's confident smile faltered for the first time. Ryan clicked again, pulling up a sequence of EMA's internal HOA correspondence he'd obtained through a public records request. The messages revealed Karen's instructions to inspect and remove the unauthorized system without alerting authorities or the homeowner. Worse, one email showed her boasting that cutting the power to his line will teach him a lesson. Gasps filled the air. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale. Karen tried to interrupt, but Ryan spoke over her. You accuse me of endangering this neighborhood. You fined me, harassed me, and tried to destroy my reputation. But what you actually did was interfered with a protected federal emergency network. Then he played the final clip and audio, recording of his conversation with the federal investigator. The agent's voice echoed clearly. If they decut any deeper into that line, they would have taken down part of the emergency response grid. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. For the first time, she looked small-cornered, fragile. Ryan turned to the crowd. You wanted order. You wanted control. But what you got was chaos caused by the very people who claimed to protect this community. He looked at Karen one last time. You didn't just break the rules. You broke the law. The doors at the back of the room opened, and two federal agents stepped in. The entire room froze as they walked straight toward the board table. Karen tried to stand, tried to speak, but the agent held up his badge. Karen Whitfield, he said firmly, you're under investigation for tampering with federal infrastructure. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as they escorted her out, her protests echoing down the hallway. Ryan didn't smile. He just stood there, feeling the tension drain from his body as months of fear and frustration melted into quiet relief. But deep down he knew this wasn't over, not yet. Because what the HOA had done went far beyond him. There were fines, lies, and secrets buried under every polished lawn on Cedar Ridge Lane. And now that the truth was out, everything was about to unravel. In the days that followed, Cedar Ridge Lane became a place unrecognizable. Reporters appeared, cameras lingered, and neighbors who once hid behind their hedges now whispered in small, nervous groups. The HOA office was sealed off for investigation, its files confiscated, its accounts frozen. What had once been a symbol of order now stood as a monument to corruption. Ryan watched it all unfold from his porch. The same porch where he'd once felt so powerless. But power, he learned, had a strange way of shifting hands. The federal investigation moved fast. Evidence, mounted financial inconsistencies, unauthorized expenditures, and a web of deceit that reached beyond the community. Karen had used HOA funds to cover fines, pay off allies, and silence dissenters. Her maintenance team wasn't even licensed, just a handful of hired enforcers who followed orders without question. And while the investigation deepened, the board members scrambled to save themselves, releasing public statements, blaming Karen, pretending they'd been misled. But the truth was clear, they all knew. And the community knew it too. For the first time, residents began speaking up, sharing stories of fines for trivial infractions, of intimidation, of sudden rule changes that always seemed to favor someone connected to the board. It wasn't just Ryan's fight anymore, it was everyone's. Still, amidst the chaos, one question haunted him. Why had Karen gone so far? What drove her to risk everything for control over a small neighborhood? He found the answer in a box of documents recovered from her office. Buried beneath meeting minutes and financial forms was a single file marked Infrastructure Project. Inside were plans to connect the network to a private security system Karen had been developing with a corporate partner, offering surveillance data in exchange for funding. Her sabotage of Ryan's system wasn't just about control, it was about covering her tracks. If the federal network detected her modifications, the entire scheme would collapse. She hadn't seen Ryan as a neighbor, she'd seen him as a threat. That realization hit him harder than anything else. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was exploiting them. And the entire HOA had let it happen. The climax reached its peak when the federal report was made public. Ryan was cleared of all accusations. his system praised for preventing a broader failure. Karen, on the other hand, faced charges of interference with critical infrastructure and misuse of community funds. The footage of her being escorted into a federal vehicle became the most watched clip in local news history. But the true moment of reckoning came at the next HOA meeting, now led by interim members. Ryan was invited to speak. As he stood before the very people who had once turned their backs on him, he felt no anger, only a strange, quiet sadness. "This could have been avoided," he said. "All it took was honesty. Instead, we built fences not just around our homes, but around our hearts. We let fear and control replace trust. And look where that got us." His words hung in the air. For once, no one interrupted. No one argued. He left the meeting without waiting for applause. As he walked home, the streetlights flickered softly above him, and for the first time, the neighborhood was silent, not with fear but with reflection. Behind him, the community center lights dimmed, and somewhere in the quiet darkness, a new kind of order began to take root, not one built on power, but on consequence. Yet even as Ryan closed his door, a single thought lingered. The federal agents had told him the investigation was ongoing, that there were other neighborhoods, other systems, other HOAs with similar irregularities. The idea chilled him, but it also sparked something else. Determination. He turned back to his workshop, opened his laptop, and began building something new, a monitoring network, one that couldn't be silenced or controlled. Because now, he understood that real security didn't come from rules or fines or authority. It came from truth. And as his screen flickered to life, displaying the network map of Cedar Ridge Lane, one last question echoed in his mind, a question he knew others would soon be asking too. How many more Karens were out there, hiding behind the perfect smile of a homeowner association? Months passed, and the chaos that once defined Cedar Ridge Lane began to fade into a fragile calm. The neighborhood that had lived under a cloud of fear and control was slowly learning to breathe again. The HOA's iron grip had been dismantled, its once-dreaded bylaws under federal review, and its former members scattered, some resigned, others facing quiet investigations of their own. The grand HOA office, once a place of intimidation, now stood empty, its polished doors sealed by official tape and silence. The sign that once read Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association was taken down one morning by the residents themselves. No ceremony, no announcement, just quiet relief. For Ryan, the quiet was both strange and welcome. He had grown used to the constant hum of conflict, the sense of being watched, the feeling that every step outside his house was a test of defiance. Now, there was only the sound of the wind brushing against the oak tree and the faint hum of his repaired network. The same system that once drew suspicion was now praised by the federal infrastructure team. They had even asked him to consult on a new national model for neighborhood emergency communications. It was Sorrel how something that nearly ruined him had become his redemption. But the aftermath wasn't easy. His name had been cleared publicly, yet not everyone moved on, some neighbors avoided him, not out of hostility, but out of guilt. They had believed Karen's lies, joined in her whisper campaign, or stood silent when he needed support most. It wasn't hatred anymore, it was shame. But Ryan didn't hold grudges. He knew how fear worked, how easy it was for people to trade reason for safety, truth for comfort. The real victory wasn't in seeing them punished, it was in seeing them change. Slowly, the community began to rebuild, not with power, but with transparency. Meetings were open to all. Now, decisions voted on publicly. Records posted online. There were no secret committees, no private agendas. And for the first time, the phrase community rules actually meant something fair. Ryan watched as new families moved in, unaware of the storm that had nearly torn the neighborhood apart. To them, Cedar Ridge was just another pretty place to call home, and maybe that was how it should be. But deep down, Ryan knew history had to be remembered, not buried. He began writing everything down: the letters, the hearings, the nights of fear, the turning points. What started as a personal log became something bigger, a story, one that exposed the darker side of control hidden behind manicured lawns and smiling neighbors. When he finally published it online under the title "The Line Beneath the Lawns," it spread faster than he expected. People from across the country shared their own HOA horror stories, their own encounters with petty power and unchecked authority. Ryan's experience had struck a nerve. Soon, reporters reached out. He appeared on local broadcasts, podcasts, and even government panels discussing homeowner rights and digital security. The Arni Wasanti Lostoni Maman, once accused of sabotage, now teaching communities how to protect themselves. But despite the newfound recognition, Ryan stayed grounded. He still spent his evenings in the workshop, maintaining his systems, updating his logs, ensuring that Cedar Ridge remained connected and safe. Sometimes when the night was quiet and the lights from the houses glowed softly through the trees, he'd think back to the moment it all began, to Karen's sharp knock on his door, to the warnings, the accusations, the fear. And every time, he'd come to the same realization. Power, no matter how small or local, changes people when it goes unchecked. It wasn't about HOAs, or bylaws, or property disputes. It was about control. And control, once corrupted, could destroy even the most peaceful place. The federal agents who had handled the case stayed in touch. They told him that his data logs had been instrumental in uncovering a string of similar incidents in other states. Different HOAs, same tactics: misuse of funds, harassment, data tampering. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a pattern. Ryan's case became the foundation for a new federal oversight proposals, something to hold homeowner associations accountable for their actions, to protect residents from the abuse of authority. When the news broke that Congress had officially adopted the Cedar Ridge provision, Ryan felt a quiet sense of pride. His battle, which once seemed so small, had reshaped something far larger. It had changed the law, and yet, amidst all the recognition, Ryan stayed humble. He never saw himself as a hero, just someone who refused to stay silent, because in the end, the real victory wasn't in bringing others down. It was in proving that one voice, when persistent enough, could expose the cracks in even the most polished facade. Cedar Ridge had changed, and so had he. The man who once built systems for order had learned that true order couldn't be programmed. It had to be earned through trust, fairness, and the courage to stand alone when everyone else stays quiet. But as peace settled over the neighborhood, a subtle unease remained, a reminder that power always finds new hands, and that sometimes the real danger isn't in the people who seize control, but in the silence of those who let them. Time passed, and seasons rolled over Cedar Ridge like waves erasing footprints in the sand. The lawns grew back greener, the laughter of children returned, and for a while, it almost felt as if the past had never happened. But memory has a way of lingering in the corners, in the way people hesitated before bringing up the H, or in how the community center still bore faint marks from where the federal agents had placed their seals. The new board was smaller, quieter, more transparent. They'd sworn to keep everything open. Budgets, votes, complaints. There were no more secret meetings, no more executive sessions. The residents themselves had taken over, creating a balance of power that actually worked. And at the heart of it all was Ryan. He never sought leadership, but people turned to him anyway, for advice, for reassurance, for perspective. He became the unspoken guardian of the neighborhood, not through authority, but through trust. Even those who once doubted him found themselves drawn to his calm steadiness. And though he smiled and helped whenever asked, deep inside, he carried the weight of everything that had happened: the fear, the humiliation, the isolation. Some nights, when the air was still and his computer screens dimmed, he'd catch himself wondering if it was truly over. Because the truth was, corruption rarely disappears, it simply changes faces. And while Cedar Ridge had healed, other neighborhoods were just beginning to wake up to the same sickness. One evening, as he reviewed the new communication data logs, Ryan noticed something curious: a small pattern of interference originating from outside the district. It wasn't local, and it wasn't random. It was the same kind of signal tampering he'd seen before. He alerted the federal contact he still kept in touch with, and within days, a new investigation was launched. That was when he realized the fight hadn't ended, it had only evolved. His story, once personal, had become a blueprint for others, a warning and a weapon. Soon, he began consulting on national initiatives, helping develop systems to prevent digital abuse by local authorities. His workshop turned into a small command center, lined with monitors tracking community systems across multiple regions. And while others saw him as a whistleblower, Ryan saw himself as something simpler, a neighbor who refused to look away. The news cycle eventually moved on, but the ripples of his actions never stopped. Across the country, HOAs began rewriting their bylaws, introducing oversight committees, and limiting the power of individual board members. State legislatures passed bills inspired by his case, and even federal agencies acknowledged the Cedar Ridge model as a standard for ethical governance. Ryan had done what few ever could. He turned personal injustice into systemic reform. Yet even amidst all the accolades, one thing remained unchanged: his sense of solitude. Because when you stand against power, even when you win, you never walk away untouched. The scars remain not visible, but etched in the way you look at authority, the way you listen for silence between words. But those scars became his strength. They reminded him why he fought, why he spoke up, why he refused to let the system define right and wrong. And as Cedar Ridge entered a new era of peace, he often found himself thinking not of Karen's downfall, but of her motives. How something as small as pride could grow into tyranny when left unchecked. It wasn't hatred that destroyed her. It was her obsession with control, her belief that order meant obedience. That realization became his message whenever he spoke publicly. Rules don't build communities. People do. Years later, when he looked back on it, all the meetings, the threats, the investigation, the night the lights went dark, he realized that what happened on Cedar Ridge was more than a conflict. It was a lesson written in wires and fear, in silence and defiance. It was proof that power without empathy is just another form of chaos. And though the story had ended, its impact was still spreading. His book had become required reading in law courses about governance and ethics. Documentaries were made. Podcasts told the story in serialized form, each episode ending with the same haunting question he once asked himself under the dim light of his workshop. What happens when those who enforce order become the ones who break it? The answer was clear now: it only stops when someone refuses to stay silent. And that, above all, was Ryan's legacy. Not revenge, not recognition, but a ripple of awareness that would outlive him. On the final night of autumn, as the winds whispered through the trees, Ryan stood outside beneath the same sky that once watched over his turmoil. The air was cold, but calm. The streetlights glowed, steady and soft. For the first time, he felt at peace, not because the battle was over, but because he had learned to live beyond it. And as he turned off the last light in his workshop, the hum of his network continued quietly in the background, a silent guardian, a symbol of vigilance. Because no matter how perfect a place may look from the outside, true safety doesn't come from control or compliance. It comes from courage, from integrity, and from the will to stand against the storm. That was the lasting truth of Cedar Ridge Lane. And though the world would move on and new stories would rise, one question would always remain in the hearts of those who remembered. When power knocks at your door, will you open it, or will you stand your ground and draw the line?